Roger Mudd in Washington, George Herman in Washington, Pennsylvania, Bill Plant in Seattle, and Morton Dean in Seal Beach, California.
Good evening. The Senate today began its expected but unprecedented filibuster against confirmation of a president's nominee for Chief Justice of the United States, Abe Fortas. Roger Mudd has the story.
Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield began the debate today with a curt dismissal of all charges against Justice Fortas, except the $15,000 fee he was paid this summer for a series of 9 law school lectures. That, said Mansfield, was unfortunate. The fee was solicited by Mrs. Fortas's law partner, Paul Porter, from former business associates of the justice. And Mansfield warned all members of the court to avoid breaching the court's insulation from private interests. But Democrat Philip Hart of Michigan, the floor manager for the nomination, did not fully accept Mansfield's criticism.
I think it's unfortunate that Mr. Justice Fortas didn't come to us in whole form from the hands of God, new. But the truth is that Justice Fortas is doing historically what other members of that court have done. If we want to make new rules for the future, fine. But let's live with life as it is now. In my book, I agree with the majority leader. It would be fine if we didn't have to argue this, but the meat and the potatoes of the issue before the Senate is Mr. Justice Fortas qualified? And the overwhelming professional opinion is that he's extraordinarily qualified.
Republican Robert Griffin of Michigan conceded there was nothing illegal about Fortas's lectures, but claimed they raised a question of propriety which should be unthinkable in the case of a Chief Justice.
If we win this battle in the Senate, and then the next president, whether he's Mr. Humphrey or Mr. Nixon, I'm convinced is going to send up a nomination that won't be subject to any of these charges and will do a great deal to restore respect and esteem for the Supreme Court.
All right, supposing you lose.
Well, supposing we lose, that's going to be a sad day, I think, in this country. To think that this kind of a nomination could get by the Senate. It would be a sad thing, I think, in the history of the Senate as well.
Mansfield today promised to stay with the nomination until it is disposed of one way or the other. But early next week, if the administration falls embarrassingly short of the 2/3 vote needed to break the filibuster, the nomination could well be withdrawn. Roger Mudd, CBS News, Washington.
A Republican Congressman, Melvin Laird of Wisconsin, predicted yesterday that American troop strength in Vietnam probably would be reduced by 90,000 men by next June. Well, that statement was knocked down today by Defense Secretary Clark Clifford. He said the Pentagon plans to go on sending more units to Vietnam until it reaches the currently authorized level of 549,500 men. Former Vice President Nixon said today he agrees with Clifford that there should be no troop reductions. One U.S. unit scheduled for Vietnam will not be making the trip. It is the 1st Squadron, 18th Armored Cavalry Regiment, now stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington. The U.S. command in Saigon said that in place of the 1,100 Americans, the South Vietnamese unit of equal size will receive enough armored vehicles and equipment for frontline duty. The spokesman said the cancellation will have no effect on the U.S. troop ceiling.
Oh, the disadvantages of the new Benson & Hedges 100s. They're longer than king size. A lot longer than king size. 3 puffs, 4 puffs, maybe 5 puffs longer than king size. Once you get the hang of them.
The electro-coated Persona gives such a smooth, comfortable shave. Why shouldn't injector users have a smooth, comfortable shave too? Introducing the electro-coated injector blade.
In the war, an estimated 600 North Vietnamese armed with flamethrowers and automatic weapons tried to overrun a special forces camp 70 miles northwest of Saigon. But the defenders, 400 government irregulars and a few American advisors, drove them off with the help of air and artillery support. The communists left 135 dead. 12 South Vietnamese were killed. South Vietnam's customs director estimated today that $126 million worth of goods from U.S. military post exchanges ended up on the black market last year. He said this included goods stolen from the PX system and goods resold on the black market by Allied troops having PX privileges. He told reporters that, quote, drastic steps are being taken to halt the diversion of PX supplies, but he gave no details. U.S. and North Vietnamese negotiators held the 23rd session of their preliminary talks in Paris today, and again, no progress. Senator Edmund Muskie, the Democratic vice presidential candidate, encountered heckling from both the political left and the right as he campaigned today. The first outburst came at Washington and Jefferson College in Pennsylvania, and CBS News correspondent George Herman was there.
Stop the war! 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 Stop the war!
Senator Muskie has been heckled before, but never so loudly and enthusiastically as by a noisy group of students from Washington and Jefferson College during his appearance at Pennsylvania's Washington County Courthouse.
I found it possible to do it in my state. I found it possible to do it in every state in the country until I came to Washington to meet the students of Washington Jefferson College. And it's hard for me to believe that you're different than other Americans in opening your minds and your hospitality and your courtesy to visiting people.
Characteristically, the senator refused to become engaged in a shouting match, as he called it. He invited the students to choose a spokesman. They selected Rick Brody of New York.
Wallace is no answer, Nixon's no answer, and Humphrey's no answer. Sit out this election. Don't vote for president. Get those people elected to senator, congressmen, local people who believe as you do against the war, for the poverty program, for black autonomy of the ghettos, and elect them. Let them know that we don't want a president if we have to have it in their term. If Daley dictates to us who the president's going to be, if Barr dictates to us who the president's going to be, we don't need that.
Then the senator took his turn, and the students listened to him quietly.
And Rick Brody has made very clear your general attitude toward all three presidential candidates. But they are not carbon copies of each other. So look them over and make your choice, because this is the best way in the long run to get this country moving in the direction in which you want it to move. But I want to say to you that there are those of us in this system who have worked toward the objectives that I hear you voicing every day. Maybe not as effectively as we might because of our own shortcomings and weaknesses. Maybe not in the way that you would and that you will when you are given the opportunity. But don't misjudge the basic goodwill of this American system toward the objective of making it truly a system responsive to the needs and the will and the voice of the 200 million Americans who make up this society. Thank you very much, all.
At the end of the speech, the students gave Senator Muskie a hand, and he left quickly for his next engagement in Pennsylvania. George Herman, CBS News at Washington County Courthouse.
From Pennsylvania, Muskie flew to Michigan, and there in Taylor, a white middle-class suburb of Detroit, was heckled by supporters of George Wallace. Correspondent Herman reports that he handled them with as much aplomb as he handled the college hecklers. The Republican vice presidential candidate, Spiro Agnew, today expressed confidence that President Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War would not be affected by politics. Governor Agnew told a news conference in Los Angeles, in his words, the president is involved for the good of the United States and won't let any political considerations affect him.
Shell presents The Answer Man, and here he comes in the answer to our first question.
Somebody asked, what's the world's record for gasoline mileage? What must be the world's record was set in 1952 by two Shell engineers. They drove this modified Chevy and got 168 miles per gallon of gasoline. They used tricks you wouldn't dare try in normal driving, like rock-hard ball tires to cut friction, a special body without bumpers, streamlined to cut wind resistance. They never drove over 20, and they coasted whenever possible. Their gasoline, Shell's top quality as it came from the pump. Next question.
Someone told me that besides platformate, other ingredients help Super Shell's mileage. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. There are several ingredients. One is TCP, Shell's patented additive. It helps keep spark plugs from fouling, misfiring, and wasting gasoline. TCP teams up with platformate to give you good mileage.
Thank you. The Answer Man is brought to you by the makers of Super Shell, good mileage gasoline.
The House Commerce Committee today approved legislation to include George Wallace in any televised presidential debates. The measure would suspend the so-called equal time requirement to permit three-way debates among the major candidates. Final congressional approval, however, is in doubt. Campaigning in California, Vice President Humphrey proposed his own form of presidential debates. He called upon rivals Richard Nixon and George Wallace to join him in a cross-country series of appearances from the same platforms. Earlier in the day, Humphrey spoke out for a major increase in Social Security benefits. More on that story from Morton Dean.
Humphrey's appeal here is, of course, for the votes of California's and the nation's senior citizens. This state, which has the second largest chunk of electoral votes, 40, also has the second largest number of persons over age 65, second only to New York State in both cases. The Democratic nominee was introduced by one of the country's better-known elder citizens, Jimmy Durante.
The Vice President of the United States, Herbert H. Humphrey.
As President, if you permit me to serve you in that high office, I would call for the following things. Increasing Social Security benefits by 50% across the board, and we can do it. And people say, well, how will you pay for it? Out of a growing, expanding economy. It is actuarially sound, priced out, with graduated increases from the present monthly minimum, and it is a minimum today of $55 to $100 for an individual, and from $82.50, which is the monthly minimum for a couple, to $150. And this can be done during the next 4 years of administration. And we'll get it done because our record proves that we keep those promises.
Some of the increased Social Security benefits would be financed out of general revenues rather than from any increases in Social Security payments. It is estimated that there are over 17 million Americans aged 65 and over. About 2 million of them are residents of California, a large number of voters, and Hubert Humphrey is after them. Morton Dean, CBS News, with the Humphrey campaign in Seal Beach, California.
Richard Nixon also campaigned on the West Coast today. At Seattle, he took a boat ride, visited a shipyard, and called for a build-up of the nation's sea power. Bill Plant reports.
Courting local votes in Seattle, Nixon boarded a hydrofoil for a ride across Elliott Bay to a shipyard. For a first-hand look, he said, at the problems of the maritime industry. He would have liked to have visited Boeing aircraft, but they don't accept campaigning politicians. This was not a day of campaign rhetoric. It was instead for the photographers. And as the candidate posed in the bow, he who dislikes hats of any kind was offered a hard hat for the shipyard visit.
The shipyard. My God, I'm not going to wear that hat. Not me. Hat for me.
But it was a regulation, so at the last minute, he did put it on, a little grudgingly perhaps, after telling newsmen that it was the last time they'd see him in a hat during the campaign.
Let me get that. That was first. You got the right tilt, Ringo? To the left? Oh, boy, that's not good. You want to be right in the center. How are you? How are you? Glad to see you. All right, here we go. Fire.
This week's tour, all in friendly territory, is to reassure the faithful and to boost local GOP candidates. Nixon says he keeps warning his staff against overconfidence, but he himself hardly looks worried. Bill Plant, CBS News, Seattle.
Ford said today it will boost list prices on 1969 cars by an average of $47. General Motors has hiked basic car prices by an average of $49 against Chrysler's $84 average increase. There's some feeling now that Chrysler will bring its prices in line with the other two. The House today, in giving final congressional approval to the Farm Bill, refused to put a $20,000 limit on government payments to any one farmer for taking land out of production. The compromise bill extends the present price support and production control program for 1 year. The $20,000 ceiling had been included in the House version of the bill, but was dropped in conference with the Senate. Some House members today fought unsuccessfully to restore it. Earlier this year, Senator John Williams charged that 5 big farm operations got more than $1 million each in subsidies last year, and 15 got between $500,000 and $1 million. He also said that more than 6,500 farming operations received payments of more than $25,000 each. The government today set new price ceilings on natural gas supplied to 28 states and the District of Columbia, and said the decision would mean rate reductions totaling $49 million a year. The ruling covers the mammoth southern Louisiana natural gas field, which serves an area that includes more than 70% of the nation's population. Government forces remain at 2 college campuses in Mexico City tonight. The situation is relatively quiet, and little new violence has been reported. Serious clashes between rebel students and police and Army troops left at least 15 persons dead and many injured earlier this week. The students now are planning renewed demonstrations for Friday.
How come we always run out of tape when I need it?
Why, Dad, we all use the Scotch Magic transparent tape. It's the best tape made to repair a shade. Head of the class for sticking to glass. Makes you able to write a label. Easy to arrange a pattern change.
Learn something every day.
That's just the beginning. Scotch Magic transparent tape is invisible on the job. So, it disappears from sight, seals a package tight. Men's torn pages to last for ages. An everyday tool for kids at school, and really a gem to repair a hem. So here's a roll of Scotch Magic transparent tape for your very own.
How about that?
Look for Scotch Magic transparent tape in the green plaid dispenser.
Also from 3M, a different kind of tape.
Scotch package sealant tape is extra wide, keeps packages neat and secure. No water, no mess. Sticks fast and holds tight for easier boxing.
In Portugal, a 62-year-old law professor reportedly has been chosen to head the government in place of the critically ill Antonio Salazar. He is Marcelo Caetano, a former Salazar cabinet minister, and he's not expected to produce any major changes in Portugal's authoritarian regime. The Czechoslovak ambassador to the United States, Zdeněk Černík, said today that his government opposes any discussion of the Soviet bloc invasion of his country by the UN General Assembly. Černík said the crisis must be resolved within the communist camp. There's been no move so far to put the Czechoslovak issue on the Assembly's agenda, but the Western Alliance is all but certain to bring it up during policy speeches. Meanwhile, in Czechoslovakia, the government was reported to have fired the national radio and television directors. Both men are considered progressives. The move was seen as another concession to Moscow. Russia today expelled a New York girl, 24-year-old Vicky Revere, and a young Briton arrested in Moscow yesterday for distributing leaflets protesting the Czechoslovak invasion. The two were described by Soviet officials as, quote, unknowing pawns on the chessboards of the imperialist intelligence services. Red Cross officials said today that enough food is now being delivered to Biafra to keep the starvation rate among refugees there from rising any further. At present, about 6,000 Biafrans are dying every day. Last night, we showed some North Korean propaganda film depicting the communist version of the capture of the U.S. intelligence ship Pueblo last January. Tonight, we have another segment showing a news conference for the Pueblo crewmen that was staged by North Korea and attended by reporters handpicked by the communists. The nature of the production might easily arouse suspicions about the content. For instance, picture and soundtrack are not synchronized in some scenes. Frequently, when one of the Americans speaks, the words do not match the lip movements, and the crewmen's statements sound carefully memorized.
Newspaper, news agency, and radio correspondents at home had a press conference on August 13 with the crew members of the U.S. Imperialist Armed Spaceship Pueblo nor in detention in our country since they were captured by self-defense measures of the naval force of the Korean People's Army on January 23 while conducting criminal espionage and hostile acts deep in the territorial waters of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Now let's have a frank talk.
As is well known to the American people, we of Pueblo were caught red-handed while committing espionage well within your territorial waters. And all the facts of these crimes have been proven beyond a doubt by the evidence captured with us, namely the documents and the navigational records. For our part, we of Pueblo have admitted these crimes and have apologized to the Korean people and asked them for their leniency. I urgently appeal to the American people to recognize the simple truth of these statements and to urge our government to accept the responsibility for these acts, that we may be reunited with our families and loved ones.
I ardently desire to return home as quickly as possible to the United States of America, where my wife, my baby children, my sisters, my mother, my aunts, my uncle, and other relatives and friends longingly await my return. A long time ago, I admitted and apologized and am repentant for the crimes which I committed against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea accorded me leniency and humanitarian treatment even though I was a criminal. I think that perhaps just as soon as the government of the United States of America admits, apologizes, and assures not to repeat these crimes again which we have committed, that we may return home to our longing family and friends.
What do you think will be your fate if the U.S. government does not apologize for the crimes of the Pueblo?
There is a limit to the patience of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. If the United States government does not admit, apologize, and ensure that such acts will not be repeated, the crew will be held responsible for them. We will be placed on trial in this country and punished according to their laws. If this law is carried out, I will never see my parents, relatives, and friends again.
After the press conference, the correspondent sees the life of the crew of the Pueblo, the U.S. Imperial Star spaceship, and meet with individual crew members who are not present at the press conference.
시제가 되지 않는다면 그 어머니께서 온 편지를 읽어주실 수 없겠습니까?
Well, I would like to hear your mother's letter if I'm wrong.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'd be glad to read it too, sir.
네, 제 기꺼이 읽어드리겠습니다.
My heart is just broken, and many are the tears I have shed. However, I have implicit faith in God that our country will apologize so that you will all be released. Letters just pour into the senators, so don't think you are all forgotten.
Again, we should emphasize that what you saw was propaganda film produced in North Korea.
You know, this is the biggest reunion yet, Myrtle.
How many grandchildren for you, Len?
There's Jenny for fifth. You know, she doesn't warm up to me, though. Acts like I had bad breath.
I have the answer to that, Len. Listerine. It kills germs that can cause bad breath and lasts for hours.
I'll give her a whirl.
Looks like Granddad's pretty popular now.
That sure do, Myrtle.
Well, Listerine helped.
Listerine antiseptic kills germs, keeps breath fresh for hours.
When you're upset, tense, nerves snap, and each mounting pressure may start the flow of excess acid in your stomach. Result? Acid indigestion, heartburn, that burning sensation. But Rolaids, with its exclusive buffering compound, has thousands of absorbent particles. Each consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid, gives fast, lasting relief. Rolaids, consumes 47 times its weight in excess stomach acid.
Now to Washington and Eric Severide, who has some views on today's announcement regarding U.S. troop levels in Vietnam. Eric?
The Secretary of Defense has made it clear this government has no intention of reducing American troop strength in Vietnam now or at any specific future date. That should end the speculative talk of reductions, whether from the campaigning Vice President or Republican Congressman Laird, who has also spoken up on this delicate matter. It is delicate because the Paris peace talks may be nearing a critical point, and most authorities here see no reason to give Hanoi any impression now that we are contemplating a build down of the war on our own, unilaterally. Candidate Nixon's statement today is in line with that reasoning. The authorized troop level for Vietnam is 550,000 men. The actual level today is just short of that and may rise to that number. Of this gross figure, an overwhelming proportion are not combat troops, but men in supply operations in the various rear echelons, at least 85% of the total force, an appalling proportion in the view of many combat officers. If there are no plans to reduce the total authorized, there are also no plans to increase that total. General Abrams has given flat assurances that he needs no more, wants no more. The war, in fact, seems to have reached a plateau in terms of the American military establishment there. And it is now hard to see how a higher level of men, weapons, or ammunition could be put to practical use. There appear to be two big reasons for this. One is that the South Vietnamese Army, under the Abrams policy, is being put into more and more combat. The second is that the enemy seems physically unable to seriously expand and intensify the fighting. In authoritative quarters here, the conviction is that Hanoi has been trying for 2 months to mount a major offensive, but has been thrown off balance time after time by American troop mobility and the increasing effectiveness of the bombers and the long-range artillery inside South Vietnam. This interpretation of the enemy's predicament explains, at least in part, the still persisting belief that a break will come in the Paris talks. These battlefield conditions suggest that the next solid gesture toward peace may come from the enemy, but they also suggest that another solid gesture on our part may now be appropriate and fruitful. And it is on this point that the still very real argument about stopping the bombing of North Vietnam now seems to center inside the highest councils of this government. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Wednesday, September 25th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
July 13th, 1968. We gave some 67 Buick owners a preview of the 1969 Buick Electra 225. Were they impressed?
Elegant and luxurious.
I think the 69 Electra is the most beautiful car I've seen.
As the eliminator was the side vent window. Yeah, it's like looking through a picture window.
This new 6040C gives you that flexibility in the front seat.
That's a great feature because of the difference in our height.
Once you've locked the wheel in that position, it's impossible to move a car.
Oh, boy, is it cool. It's just plush. If you own an Electra, you just want to have a mink to go with it. I hope my husband hears that.
The 1969 Electra would be one of the easiest cars there is to sell.
Find out why Buick owners keep selling Buicks for us. Wouldn't you really rather have a 1969 Buick Electra 225?
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.